What's that? Ready to go? All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the March 27th Committee of the Whole meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask for any declarations of conflict. Hearing none, move to any motions to adopt the agenda. Second, all in favor? All right, I don't think we have any appointments or delegations today, so we can probably move straight to 5.1. Over to Mr. Hall. Oh, sorry, motion to receive the report. Second, all in favor?
Okay, thank you. So we have the report before you for the Way development up on the corner of Wharf and East Porpoise Bay. The council, or I guess previous councils, have seen this rezoning application a couple times. So this is a revision that the applicant has done following previous kind of direction from council and the public in the past. So they brought back a new proposal changing the proposed sort of mixed-use building in terms of the number of residential units, amount of commercial floor space, and the height of the building. So the current revised proposal is now a 5-story building with 40 residential units and 3,000 square feet of commercial floor area. The previous proposal had 1,000 square feet of commercial floor area and 47 units, I believe it was, and I think it was 4 stories. And it's kind of been, it was started off as a 6-story building, went down to 4 stories, and now it's at 5 stories. So we basically tried to outline some of the history to the application, the previous proposals, kind of where it's gone, and sort of where they are now, and some of the issues that have been raised over time from staff and the public and the council around basically, like in the beginning of the report, kind of dealing with height and neighborhood impact issues. The question around the proposal is sort of to create an urban node on this corner, which could be a great idea. At the same time, it's also the primary goods movement route along Wharf up onto East Porpoise Bay. So there's a potential conflict there between movement of goods and turning that into an urban pedestrian walkable node, especially dealing with creating new access points to the development onto Wharf and East Porpoise Bay, you know, especially on Wharf right into the right-hand turn lane and all the traffic that would go down that route. So kind of like we were talking about in the workshop just now, we've got, you know, the proposal for the site and how it works just within the context of the property, and then you start to step back a little, you know, in terms of the transportation routes around it. How does it fit into that little bit larger area? How does it connect to downtown in terms of competing or complementing with what we might want to have happen downtown, and then just the implications for moving forward in terms of, as Tracy mentioned, you know, this kind of project is one of those catalyzing projects. It will change what can happen around this area. It'll set the tone for what goes forward. So it's sort of looking at, is that the way we want to go? So again, we kind of go through the background of the various different proposals, where they are now, kind of summarize a lot of the different issues, and just bring it to the committee of the whole to spark some discussion with a view to take the revised proposal to the Advisory Planning Commission to get their input, and then bring that back to council for further direction, maybe a revised bylaw too. So if you have any questions, we can go from there.
Thank you. Questions from council, comments? Guess that's you.
Okay. I do know that there is a conversation in the community to look at addressing the highway and the movement of goods. So personally, I would like to see this corner be more pedestrian focused. I like the recommendation that you have on page 8. Bottom of the first paragraph on page 8 says there might be an option to require less of a large channelized right turn lane that could be a compromise for both aspects, both pedestrian and goods movements at this point, right? So this require a focused assessment of the intersection and turning movements with respect to the current revised proposal, and staff recommended that such a study be required. Because that would then, I agree with you. This development at this corner will change what is happening on Wharf. It will change, it will move development of more density outside of just Cowrie. It will create Wharf as also a pedestrian development or development route, or a route for pedestrians. Because we've always been talking about Wharf being, you know, from sea to sea. So if we're going to do that, how do we actually do that? This would actually, in my mind, catalyze that, and I'm in favor of that. I don't know where the rest of council is on that. So.
Councillor McLean.
On the issue of goods movement, the engineering department made a recommendation of having a 5-meter setback in the report. Is that larger than what is currently there, and has that been included in the current design?
The current design or the proposal from the applicant, you'll see later in the package in their revised submission, they have a site plan that kind of shows them bumping out the curb more than it is currently. So that's one of those issues where kind of what they're proposing in terms of making that site work, making that, especially on the wharf side, where they're proposing the commercial area and extending the curb out for pedestrian safety, for crossing and visibility, et cetera. That's going to conflict with sort of how the intersection functions now, and then potentially if we were to go to sort of the more engineering route of make it more focused on transportation and movement, like taking a further channelization to make the vehicles move easier and turn faster. So that's kind of setting up that conflict about what do we want to have happen here, and can we balance off the vehicle and goods movement with making that a somewhat more safer pedestrian experience. Because right now, again, where they're showing that curb extension to make it easier and safer for pedestrians to cross, that's where we currently have vehicles turning in. And the one option from sort of the engineering perspective is to take that even more so, to have even more of a right turn lane, so the vehicles could turn faster. You'd less likely have them actually stopping. So it would speed up the movement of traffic there, which is kind of not what you would want to have happen if you're trying to make that a safer pedestrian corner. So that's something where that's one of the issues that we need to do more work in terms of if this application is going to move forward, how do we want that to work? How is that going to work with kind of meeting sort of engineering requirements around still ensuring this functions traffic-wise for vehicles, but can still address some of the needs for creating an actual pedestrian friendly area. So yeah, at that time, that's sort of what they're proposing. So that would definitely needs more work on what we want to see happen there. And that's, sorry, just to add to that, I mean, that's one thing too, that the requirement for the intersection study, looking at turning movements, would help to kind of address some of that, focused on, again, the intersection, the access points coming into Wharf and onto East Porpoise Bay, to just have a more focused study on that and how it's working now, how it could work based on what they're proposing and is, what the conflicts might be. Just having that additional focused traffic study just on the intersection and the turning movements would help to provide more data on what can and cannot work there.
Is there, when we talk about all the traffic coming down Wharf and onto East Porpoise Bay, is anybody talking about developing I think what they call St. Mary's Drive, the gravel road that goes in behind the hospital? T2A? Is there any discussion on that to maybe?
Yes. That's all I can say. There's a conversation. We have started a conversation, but the Shuswap Nation is looking at, their whole area plan as well. So they don't know how all of that works in. So they actually were starting a conversation internally today. That's it. So, I mean, there's nothing going forward at this point. So.
For Matt?
So on that note, I'd appreciate a bit of clarification from probably the corporate officer or the CAO. Is there any way that this development could contribute to paving of Tita Way, recognizing that it's not on our District of Sechelt land? That's... You don't know? Okay.
Councilor Lam?
This area here, we have the new housing project that's underway right now, and there's an apartment block in the back, and and then there's the other condominium complex that's right beside it. But it's one of the last. Well, it's almost the furthest area from the downtown core that's on a level access, I guess, to the downtown core. It makes it easier for people to walk, wheelchair access or scooter access or whatever you have. So I don't think I'd like to see anything, a big development of this character go too much further than this, but I think it's a good location for it.
Anybody else? Councilor?
I'm just curious because according to the chart, the 2018 revision had 42 units, and this one has 40, but we've added a floor. Maybe I've missed something, but do you know, are the units going to be larger then? Is that the idea?
I think part of the change was the previous proposal had more one-bedroom units. So this one only has, I think, 3 or 4 one-bedroom units, and most of them are 2 bedrooms. And the commercial space is larger
It's
too.
increased. Okay.
So before the previous proposal, like on that corner, the wharf side, it was a round structure, and it was about 1,000 square feet of commercial space, where now it's rectangular, 2 floors of commercial space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the 3,000 square feet of commercial space would be on 2 floors on that corner, and then the residential above.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I agree in principle with Councillor Lamb that this site is suitable for increased density. The question is how much and how tall. And the difference between the previous version and this version is essentially 1 story with a little less site coverage, as I understand it. I don't see the benefits to the public of adding this 1 extra story. We get a couple more affordable housing units, but to have a 5-story building that is on the very edge of downtown is really pushing it. When I would look to examples of what a suitable development for this site would be, I look immediately next door. Wharf Plaza, 3 stories, commercial down below, couple residences above. That's what I envision for this corner. I think we have an opportunity to set the precedent for this area and have a kind of unified form of development. And the best way to do that is by sticking with what's already there, and that's a 3-story residential building. So I'd be more inclined to support something that's closer to the previous version of 4-story rather than going up to the 5 that's now.
But the 5 stories to me is a bit of a sticking point. I mean, the community, the APC, both previously identified 5-story or 5-6 stories as a big deal for them. I think, 4 stories is close to what's next door for sure. And I think it's interesting, like we have a fairly new building right there, and we're talking about right next door to it building a building that's a lot bigger as we get further out of our downtown core. I think it's backwards is what it is. It really is backwards. Yeah, so it's just a comment.
Any other comments? Oh,
I'm going to refer you to page 30. So one of the things that impacts the size is whether or not we have, 5 stories going straight up there. And what I notice here is that we have 2 stories on the front, which is your commercial, and then it steps back. So from the streetscape, it wouldn't appear as a large building on the front. That's why I'm not opposed to the 5 stories. It also reduces our footprint on the lot by 20%, which gives us, for pedestrians, if you look at page 32, yes, you have, the 5 stories, but you've also got all of the landscaping, et cetera, which would make a pedestrian-friendly interface. So that's all I have to say.
Councillor McLean.
I'm going to disagree on the appearance to pedestrians, particularly if we look at the image on page 32. That appears to be a 6-story building now because the parking level is at grade because it's on a slope. So recognizing that this is a corner lot, there's different views to it. But I think the 4-story kind of approach is much better for this property.
I'm going to agree with Councillor McLean on this. I think knocking it down to the 4 stories makes sense. Other than that, I love the look of it. It's just it's going to end up, especially on the Porpoise Bay roadside, it's going to be monolithic. Councillor Lamb, I see you thinking. You want to comment?
I like the way it looks right there, and just I think it's a nice way to end up. Just I'm looking at it and I'm just going, that's a nice way to end up the end of the block, and then if you work back from there, with if there's infill with more of these developments in that, especially in that little block, I think it looks pretty good.
So under the next steps, basically it says recommend the application be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission for their review. And along with council's comments and input, would you say that we've given them enough input to be thoroughly confused, or?
I think we should also look at page 6, under the zoning analysis. So I do know that, I mean, while the site coverage of the 4 stories, it was 20% more than this. That does have an impact on how it shows up in the community. So if we're looking at 4 stories, if that's what some are saying, I think they should also give some indication about lot coverage as well, because that will, that's right. Yes, it'll get bigger.
Well, in my opinion, I like the lot coverage size. So I guess it just knocks a floor of housing off the top, and whether that makes it a viable project, that's not for me to say. But that would be my thoughts for that.
So just clarification, so you're saying you like the 34% coverage, but only 4 stories?
That's correct.
I'll make a recommendation that this be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission along with the comments that came from committee. Obviously, we're divided.
How it was presented before and have that, so we can visually look at that, what it was before.
Yeah, I mean, if you want it, when we bring it back next time, we can bring the previous proposal too, just for comparison, if you want to see the site plan.
Or we could, you could just direct us to where it was in our previous agendas, right? And we could have that information.
Okay, we got a seconder. All in favor? Any further discussion before we move on? No? Okay. Item 5.2, General Fund Operating Budget deliberations. Motion to receive the report. All in favor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is basically a summarization, a continuation of the report from last meeting on March 13th, where we went through the changes to the financial plans and proposed funding allocations from reserves. Out of that last meeting, the committee did recommend to add the 2 positions, one for the building inspector, actually, well, the funding for the building inspector was brought up, and the administration facility coordinator, but you did ask us to come back with a business plan for the development engineer position. Sort of on through further review by the director of operations and engineering, we really looked at the work that was being done by the various staff members, and really feel that with the workload on the municipal engineer, that through contracted services we could probably cover that workload, which was primarily where that position was meant to cover. So at this point, we're actually proposing to withdraw the request for that position, see how this works for this upcoming year. If there's a need, come back with a proposal in a future year. So with that, we had left the last meeting with a proposed tax increase of 5.82%. With the withdrawal of this position, where tax increase for operations at 5.45%, plus the 3% for the increased capital renewal, brings it to 8.45%. So at this point, I'm seeking the committee's approval to endorse the budget as proposed, and next meeting, I'd come back with a report really looking at how that 8.54% or 8.45% would be allocated, whether it be across the board, more residential, more commercial, but the total tax increase would be set. We'd just be looking at proposing how that might be allocated or the burden shared. That's my report.
Thank you. Councilor McLean.
So I'd like to thank staff for thinking critically around this role. It states here that you're looking to rely on contract support. Is there any increase in funding needed to essentially hire more contractors? Or do you believe that you can fit that within the current budget?
We believe we can deal with that within the current budget as necessary.
Okay.
It would be very select jobs as we require. It wouldn't be just a blanket thing. It might be one development application or one capital project that we would ask someone to deal with specifically. So.
Councilor Lamb.
Just, so the property tax increase required for capital is 3%. So is that $255,000, where does that go? Is that put aside in a special fund, or is it so it can be accumulate, or is it just go into?
A bit of both. Really, it's to the 3% increase is really to increase the amount of current money that we're collecting that goes towards capital. The 5-year then capital plan then has us spending that money some years more than others. So one year we may not spend all the money that goes in for capital from taxes, and we'd reserve that money. Another year we might actually spend a little bit more, but you end up with a steady increase as opposed to these peaks and valleys of high tax increases, low tax increases. It really smooths it out. So that's really the idea behind this is it's a standard amount going into the capital funding, and we spend it as needed. So in this case, let's find that report. So in the case of 2019, actually, we're spending more money. We're spending money that's in the reserve plus the money that's going in. So the capital plan right now, as we'll get into the next report, has the capital reserve going from a balance of $662,000 down to about $338,000. So we'd be spending all the money for capital plus an additional $300,000 that's currently in reserve.
So for some reason, I've got in my mind that this 3% is supposed to be monies set aside for our capital assets for the infrastructure in our community, because obviously we don't have a very large reserve fund. If we had a road failure or something like that, or if we wanted to, upgrade Field Road, or I went out to Tawanik the other day, so that road could use a little work too. So,
through Councillor Lamb, through the chair, that's ultimately the goal. The real challenge is that we started 2 years ago with no money going from current taxes into capital. So, if you look at the depreciation, our assets depreciate by about $2.73 million a year. So theoretically, to maintain our assets at the current level, we should be spending $3 million a year. Of course, to do that would have required a 60-70% tax increase. So really the goal is this 3% increase over a number of years will get us there. In the interim, we still have maintenance to do. We have deferred works to be done. There's, rather than just replacing all assets, some are just maintained and you extend the life of them. So the real strategy on the operating side is just to increase the amount of current taxes that are going towards capital versus towards operating expenses. Once we know that capital money, we can come up with a capital plan that will utilize that money as we go along. And if council sticks with the strategy for several more years, we can actually start to bank money and build up a much larger reserve, which would cover a roof replacement or some large capital project. We're just not quite there yet, but the strategy is getting us there, but it's still going to take several more years.
So I'm just wondering, like, if we approve number 2 here in our recommendations, and then are we going to be, like, in this capital 5.3, then are we going to be able to discuss this and make any changes or in that format, or if whatever a recommendation is 5.2, does that sort of stop our budget deliberations more or less?
It does, well, hopefully on the operating side, because this is where the tax rate comes in. The next item, 5.3, if there's certainly a capital project that you don't think is necessary, should be pushed out and what have you, then it really, I wouldn't say it would change the operating side. It would just mean that money wouldn't be spent. It would stay in the reserve, perhaps being used for a different project or something in the future. The only challenge would be if you wanted to add a lot of projects to 2019 beyond the $300,000 of unspent capital reserve that we project to have at the end of 2019. If you wanted to add a $400,000 project, that would be a challenge. But otherwise, no, the two are somewhat separated.
Go ahead.
I think what I'm hearing from Councillor Lamb is that when this comes back, so this is committee, right? This would have to come back to council to be approved. Sounds like what you'd like to see when it comes to council is what are the specifics that we've actually approved inside of here? We know we've approved funding for the library, for example. We want to see what those pieces are so that they're clear to us when we're voting for the increase and they're clear to the community going forward. And then at that point, if we look at that and say, you know what, we do need to make some changes here, we actually can see what the pieces are. Would that help?
Yeah, yes, yeah, and I just want to understand where this, this $250,000, I mean, it basically becomes a slush fund. I mean, we need it, we need it today to cover our expenses. So, somehow we have to get our reserves back on track here somehow. I'd rather, we've gone through a couple of good years here. We should have had the 67% increase a couple of years ago, and especially with the last council, and then we could have gone with that's easy.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, and kind of jumping ahead to the next report, but if you go to page 64 in the agenda, that probably hopefully might clarify this, where that column, the general capital, that really shows the continuity of that reserve. So as you can see, the $712,000 contribution in 2019, that includes the 3% tax increase that we're proposing. Our current budget has expenses of $1 million, leaving a balance of $338,000. 2020, another 3% increase increases the contribution to 968, spending 960, down to 345. The reserve does get built up. You can see in the way the plan's working now, we have almost $800,000 in that reserve by the end of 2023. So as you can see, we're starting to turn that corner. It's really just taking the time to get there. So that's really hopefully answering your question of where we're slowly building it up, but expending money as we need to.
Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Todd.
I'd like to move recommendation 2.
Austin. What's that? All in favor? Anybody opposed? It was slow, but it was there. Yes, and you'll bring back details of how that's all going to be spent as per Mayor Seegers. Okay, moving on to 5.3. Motion to receive the seconder. All in favor? And it's halfway done for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is really a continuation from the February 27th Committee of the Whole meeting, where we went through the capital plan, the additional requests suggested by staff, and the additional requests included by the community groups. From that, on pages 61 through 63, were all the projects that the committee asked for some direction or provide us with some direction, ask for their information. So I provided this chart here. I can go through real quickly if you want, and the projects that we've sort of modified and changed within the plan. So on the Ebb Tide Dog Park, it was a question whether the water resource or the new operations center project would impact this, and the answer from staff is no, that we may move the where the people work now over to that building, but they really aren't necessarily connected necessarily. One wouldn't impact the other. On the Trailway Ocean waterfront, it was suggested that project would be moved to 2020 with some public engagement in 2019, so that's been reflected in the plan as presented today. The Ebb Tide Park, this was basically an old project that inadvertently should have been removed. The Parks Master Plan had the human park, if you want, taken out of the plan, so the previous plan had both the dog park and the human park in there, so we've taken that human park out of the plan because it's no longer in the Parks Master Plan that was endorsed by council previously. The paving program, renamed it the local road program because I didn't think we necessarily had to call it the McElhaney report every time. So it's the local road program, and as per the direction of the committee, the funding was raised to $350,000 for every year. The Mason Road walkway, this was shifted, so we put a $5,000 for design in 2019 and $65,000 for construction in for 2020. And that's reflected in the revised plan. On the community association requests, as far as all the projects that listed signs, these are primarily operating expenses, so we wouldn't include them in the capital plan anyway, just because of the value of the sign. So at this point, it's been passed on to the operations department really to look at, see whether the signs are warranted based on traffic standards and what have you, and if so, and if they can accommodate them, I'm assuming they'll be included into their operating budget as much as they can. On the school and traffic parking problems, we put in a budget of $60,000 really just for a design. It's really just I wouldn't call it a placeholder, but an estimate of what the design might be. We don't really know. We haven't really had as much discussion with the school district at this point to find out what their plans are. So it's to put $60,000 in there for some design work should that project move forward. The Sandy Hook's reinstating the public swim floats at Sandy Hook Beach. We weren't really too clear on this one, so we really need to do some research and find out what was there, what still exists, and any liabilities or any issues would be with that. So we'd like some time to maybe look into that and bring it forward in a future year. As far as the East Porpoise Bay 2 radar speed sensor signs, that was added to the budget at a cost of $12,000. And on the district staff requests, we added a budget for $25,000 for a boat and motor, so allow us the staff to do work, particularly in the inlet, dealing with spills and other issues out there. We added the HVAC refit for the municipal hall. You'll note, though, it's been added as only funded from grants, so if we don't get a grant for that, that project would not move forward, so it's conditional on getting a grant. But at least this way, the expenditure's there, so when a grant opportunity comes along, we can then move forward on it relatively quickly. Actually, there's a grant opportunity that we're going to be seeking, but whether it's successful or not, we'll have to wait and see. And we removed the mid-block crosswalk, the lights for Calgary Street. We put in the 4-way stop signs, and we'll see how well that works. And if necessary, we'll bring this project forward in the future if required. So with all that, all the changes that are made, everything in the capital plan can be funded. So the attachment 1 shows the current capital plan with all those changes. Everything can be funded with our known revenue and our projected future revenues. As I was talking earlier, on page 64 shows some reserve balances just to show that the capital reserve, the gas tax reserve, and the sewer reserve stay in a positive position throughout the 5 years. Gas tax does get quite low. You see by 2023, we're pretty much used all the money that's coming in there. There is a hope that that is going up. I did hear a rumor that the gas tax allocation from the federal government's going up, but until UBCM looks at it and determines how much they would share, because they get the entire bulk from the federal government and they divvy it up among the municipalities. So until we know that amount, I don't want to assume any more than what we're already getting. And finally, the sewer reserve. And I know this was a question about the septage. We're looking into that. Next week, we'll have a report on some septage rates and the costs for operating that facility. And there may be some opportunity to repay the sewer reserve for some of the expenses. There's some questions about how much of the lagoon was filled up prior to the Water Resource Center coming on, so it should be paid for by everybody versus how much has been added in the last 3 years. But regardless, there is an extra $200,000 in a septage reserve to do the work that needs to be done in the lagoon now, so it still has to come out of the sewer reserve just to get that work done. That lagoon is at capacity now, and ultimately we could look at paying it back, and that can be discussed next week. So at this point, really what I'm hoping for is to get an endorsement for the capital plan as presented, and that will be wrapped up into the bylaw that ultimately comes to council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Toth?
Thank you. The local, question for staff, the local road paving program, refer to it by its new name. Do we have priorities for 2019 established for that program?
Yes, we do. What we're contemplating on doing is we're going to be spending around $50,000 on Wakefield as we finish up the sewer extension project in there. Also, Seashell Inlet Road, we're going to be doing about $225,000 work on that road. It's going to start from Uplands and work down. There's a couple areas that are very chicaney and a lot of deflection, so we're going to be spending some money in there. As well as Mason Road, we've got about $65,000 there to do some edging and fixing of some sagging areas through that area. And then Fairway and Rippleway, the intersection, about $10,000 in there, so that comes out to our $350,000.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, Councillor McLean.
Just follow up on the Wakefield Road repaving. Would that give a totally new surface for that road, or are we talking spot paving in difficult areas?
That's correct. There'll be a full width of asphalt.
For the full length of the road, or selected areas?
No, it's between Nose Bay Road and Anchor Road.
Okay, so at the top there, yeah.
Mayor Segers.
Thank you. I noticed at the bottom of page 66, and a few other places, it talks about unallocated projects. And it's got a budget amount of, in this case, in 2023, of $500,000. Can you explain what that is in each of the categories?
What I added, I guess I should have mentioned that, I kind of slipped that in, didn't I? But in 2023, when I looked at the 2023 budget, I just felt it seemed light. I think, unfortunately, we didn't do enough look at what we were spending or the projects that we would need to do. So it's really in there as a placeholder. I looked at what we're spending in average, in this case, this being the parks area, and saying on average, you see in 2022, it's about $459,000 or $611,000. So I think we know we're going to do maintenance. So what I really put in these allocated projects in there was to allow us to look at the continuity of the reserves, just to say, okay, if we add an extra $500,000 in projects in those years, what does that do to our reserve balance? And you can see it's still going up, because we had the reserve balance being like $2 million by the 2023, and I just felt that was not a realistic number. So it was just trying to get some realism into the budget, if you want.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Last page, page 72. The last item on the capital list is reclaimed water treatment and distribution. And what I notice is this keeps moving out further and further and further, and yet I also am hearing about potential grants that are available out there. So I'm wondering when we are looking at potentially doing work on getting ready for moving this forward. Because unless we've got the project ready, when the grants become available, we won't be able to take advantage of them. So I'm wondering if we move that up, what would that look like?
I may defer to Director of Operations, but I guess really the issue would be if we were doing any planning work ahead of time is using the sewer reserve to cover that. As you can see right now in the budget, it's all coming from grants. So no actual district money allocated to it. So if there was a desire to get some shovel-ready projects or some planning work done now, it would be taking it from the sewer reserve. So I would suggest then looking at page 64 and determining how much you may want to allocate to that, or if you want us to come back with a proposal. The low point is 2019, where there's about $200,000 of unspent sewer money. After that, the reserve gets a little healthier. So I would suggest perhaps a short term, but 2020 or 2021 might be some time to do some planning work if that's the desire of the committee.
Just follow up. Given our water situation and the fact that the District of Seashield is one of the biggest water users, I know that during the summer we use the other water source that we have over there, but if we have preparation for using reclaimed water, which many municipalities are already doing, that could potentially have some savings for the municipality down the road. Also make it available for potential other uses in the community.
If I may, just to keep the process moving, if you adopt the plan as is at this time, I mean, and with an endorse or a movement or motion from the committee, we could still look into that possibility of what it would take to do some research, do some planning, and come back with a report. There's nothing to say we can't amend the financial plan even after the May 15th date, particularly if we were simply using money that's in reserve for that at that time. So I think it needs more research before we can start adding projects at this point.
Councillor McLean.
So we got off the paving program there, so I'm going to go back to it. The paving on Seashell Inlet Road. There's a significant divot right around Tillicum Bay Road. Is that going to be paved, or are you really only talking up in Tawanek?
Yeah, at this point, we haven't done very much investigation to see what we have underneath. So we might have to phase this program in, but we're going to do the worst areas first. We also want to do the Marmot intersection. We've got some potholing, but that's not going to be very much cost. So we're going to start from Uplands and work our way down.
Okay, just keep it in mind as you're going through that one right above Tillicum Bay Road.
Councillor Toth.
Thank you. I appreciate the cost estimates for the speed sensor boards in East Porpoise Bay. I had a discussion with one of the directors for the East Porpoise Bay Community Association last night after getting home from Vancouver, and he made me aware that there's possibly some work being done with road markings this year along Seashell Inlet Road to help with bringing the speed issue into awareness. And so I would be okay with deferring this a year to see if that makes enough of a difference. The other thing is, and I don't want to commit the East Porpoise Bay Community Association to this, but he indicated that they may be willing to do some association-based fundraising towards the cost of this. So I would be okay with deferring that one year.
Any comments on that? It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'd go a step further and say remove it at this time, but I'll follow your recommendation and defer it for now.
Anybody else?
Do we need a motion on that?
You would need a motion to remove that? So, go ahead, Tom. No? All right. So motion to remove or motion to defer?
At this time, a motion to remove it from the capital plan.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? There you go. And over to Councillor Lamb.
Just a couple of things, page 67, the Public Works and Yard Reserve, so there's $866,000 there, and that's money that's set aside, I shouldn't say set aside for this, for the new Public Works building, but that's sort of what the general idea of that money is that not correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's money that's in the bank now that has been earmarked for this project. Okay. It's cash in the bank.
Okay. And then just on page 69, something that I hadn't picked up on it before, but the Wakefield Road culvert from Capital Reserve was, $500,000 set aside for that. So I would imagine with the sewer connection that's going up that road, that culvert has to be replaced. Is that correct?
No, that's a special project. That culvert is failing. It's actually getting crushed. It's very old, so that has to be replaced. That section of sewer pipe will be done with the project of replacing that culvert.
Councillor McLean, you were next.
Yeah, just give me a second to scroll back. Going to try and start at the top of the list because I got a couple more to go up. Mason Road walkway, bicycle lane, bottom of page 61. I'm wondering if this was a bit of a miscommunication. I believe this was in the capital plan, but it was not a community association request. The community association request was from in front of the elementary, so Norwest Bay to Norvan, not to the highway. So I really want to make sure that our focus is in front of the elementary school. So if we need to put more of a focus there, I'd be fine putting this off until later.
Mayor Seegers had a comment on it?
Yeah, if you look on page 62, I think there we have the money for in front of the school. And then this one on page, page 61, is they have in past come forward and looked for some kind of idea for that. So this is looking at $5,000 this year just for design, which we could then take back to the community for input to look at how do we deal with that area. Okay, so I think the majority of the funds this year are focused on what the community association said is their number one issue, and the rest is focusing on others that they want to see move forward, but not necessarily this year.
And then going on to the sign requests, I'll just ask staff to work with the community associations. I think some of these requests are a bit vague, so to know specifically what the community associations want. In particular, I heard concern around the Tilcombe Bay one and potential miscommunication there. So just making sure that there is good communication between staff and the community associations. Can I keep going?
Janice, go ahead.
I just want a little bit of clarification on the West Sechelt school traffic parking. So it says we have $60,000 for design in 2019, but we haven't had any discussions with the school district yet. And there's no budget in construction for 5 years. So does that mean we're not even looking at that to be included because that is West Sechelt's, I think, main priority has been for the last number of years?
I think the concern is really not knowing what the scope of that project would be, so not knowing even what budget to put in there. We haven't had the discussion with the school district, so once we know better what that project is, we'd come forward with a proposal of how it might fit into the budget in the future for 2020 or in sometime. I just wanted to point out, just for your information, that it's not funded, so, that was more of a caution to say, don't spend all your reserves now, because you might want it for that project later.
Councillor Rowe.
Just because it's on the same topic. So back with West Sechelt Elementary, then when we look at sort of the 5-year sidewalk walkway plan, when they talk about, for heaven's sake, 70. So when they say Mason Road walkway bicycle lane that's the wrong one. I was just looking at it. Mason Road sidewalk Norwest Bay to Norvan, which is essentially where the school is. That money to be spent in 2021-22 is not to deal with the school-related concerns. Do you? I win.
I think you found us some money, Councillor Rowe.
No, that wouldn't be that lucky. I just want to be able, the West Sechelt Community Association, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, especially with the school district involved. And I noticed that they changed the angle, they've changed to angle parking in front of the school. I don't know whether that was the school district or us that did that, but all the parking things are now angled. I haven't gone to try it. I was going to actually try parking there because they look like they're so close together that you could probably park, but nobody could get out of their car. But that's just my eyes just looking at it. But so those were my questions. Those are the three things that I've picked up on these tables, and I wondered if this one was actually meant to address the school issue, or was that, I'm not sure, something previous before the school issue came up? I'm not sure.
Sorry about the confusion. It was done at the previous West Sechelt Community Association request that is on the east side, not the school side.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a ditch on that side. They fill the ditch and put a
Right.
curb and gutter sidewalk on that side.
Okay.
That is the cost for the 170,000, and the design in-house is 30,000.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor McLean?
So I've spoken to the West Sechelt Community Association and a representative there. They saw this when it was developed a year or two ago and looked at the high price and said, let's just build on the other side where it's a whole lot easier to build on the school side. Like, in my mind, the solution is a sidewalk with parallel parking. This shouldn't be that complicated. I just want a safe place for kids to walk to school without walking behind cars backing up. So I don't want us to overcomplicate this solution with a $60,000 design fee. I just want a sidewalk.
Again, yeah, that was just kind of a rough estimate to give us 60,000 because there are so many unknowns at this time. We do not have a good understanding of what the elementary school is going to be doing. If it's going to do some reaction with the intersection, we don't know. If we don't spend that money, we would definitely flip it over into the construction.
Councillor Kuster?
I answered my question. I just really want, seems like this has been put forward, and nothing's ever happened with it. My daughter was at West Sechelt School in 2007, and nothing's changed. The school is getting busier. They're adding more portables. There's more traffic there. There's more kids there, and we still haven't addressed the safety issue around that.
Oh, go ahead.
So maybe actually going forward, what our priority should be would be to have some direction for staff about the importance of getting together with the school district on this topic. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning our wheels and getting emails from people and not knowing what to say to them.
So is there a plan for a meeting booked with the district?
Once the budget's all approved, we will start that process.
Okay. Anything else? Councillor Lamb?
I'm just wondering here on page 70 here, so when you get down to the general fund totals, so the capital reserve, it shows $1,056,000. Is that what's left over? Is that what's going to be left over when the budget is, or is that the money that's there now?
Mr. Chairman, that's the money that's being proposed to be spent out of the reserve in the year. Again, I return your attention to page 64, which shows the continuity of the money going in. So what's left in the reserve would be about $339,000, $338,000 at the end of 2019, if the plan is approved as shown. Plus $12,000 because we took out the
Oh, that's right. There you go. Yeah. Okay, that's what good.
Councilor McLean?
Moving on to the boat and motor. Do we know how much we're spending on, I assume we're renting boats, renting marine services right now? Looking for cost savings that would be a result of purchasing this boat.
We have been very fortunate that the Indian Band allows us that opportunity to use their boats when we request them. However, it's a timing situation, and with WorkSafe and all our concerns regarding operations on the wharf, sometimes we cannot coordinate with First Nations on that. So it would be most beneficial if we had a boat for that use.
Follow up to that, are our staff trained on working on the water?
Indeed, if it's over 9.9 horsepower, I believe, or even smaller, you have to have your boat credentials and stuff. Indeed, yes, they are.
Okay, any further discussion? No? Okay. Anybody like to move on the recommendations?
Recommendation 2 as amended. Thank you.
Recommendation 2 is amended. Seconder? Okay. All in favor? Nobody opposed? There we go. And motion to adjourn. Seconder, all in favor? And